Well, it's top of the morning to you all. It is so good to see you this morning. Thank you so much for joining us for Daily Devotions through Redeeming Life Fellowship. Good morning, Luke, Stephen, uh, Glenn, Bryce, Faith, Jesse, Julie, my wife, Rob, Deb, David, Tom, B. Gosh, it's going to be harder and harder to list all of these names as our church continues to grow. So I might just be like saying like Redeeming Life family and stuff. So just so you know. But it's so good to see you all. Ressie, love you. Yeah, welcome to Daily Devotions. And today we're going to be focusing on Matthew chapter 22. And our reading plan is going to lead us through verses 23 through, that's right, 46. 23 through 46. So not a very large chunk. We tried to make them smaller so it's easier for you to be able to read through and digest littler bits, so that we can get a clear picture about just what God's Word is saying to us today. And so, but what we'll have here, this is a very interesting passage for me because the when at this point through Jesus' ministry, he's been teaching and preaching and doing miracles, and people are following him, and it's wonderful. And now he's made his what he knows is his final descent into Jerusalem, where he is going to do like what we talked about last Sunday, that the Son of Man, he's not coming to serve, but God coming to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And he's been forewarning all the disciples that when he goes to Jerusalem this time, and they never quite get this, but it's like their heart resists the the Jesus' insistence that he has to go to Jerusalem to die and to give his life, um, because this is what has to be done if he's going to fulfill um, God's purposes to be uh, Jesus, that is the one who's going to save his people from their sins. In order to do that, this has to be done. And so, not surprisingly, as he's foreshadowed from a long time before, that when he comes into Jerusalem, that he's going to be met with a lot of resistance, a lot of hostility, and that as he comes, he's not just coming to skirt around these conflicts, but to be able to face them head on. And that's exactly what he does. Now, at this stage, we're really actually jumping into a a situation where the larger historical context is actually kind of unfamiliar to us, because what you have here are these fierce conflicts and fierce arguments with these people called the Pharisees and the Sadducees. It's important to remember that the Pharisees and the Sadducees, while they're apart, they have a constituency in this larger thing, this larger legislative body called the Sanhedrin, which is the big kahunas of the Jewish ruling parties, that there is a there's a Pharisee constituency and there's a Sadducee constituency. And oftentimes they are butting heads on some very big issues. It's not dissimilar to the way in which we have a House and there's a Democratic Party and there's a Republican Party. And even though they're both a part of this larger thing called the United States of America, like, so much of our political discourse is about the sparks that fly when Democrats and Republicans start butting heads. That's not dissimilar to what you'll see between the way in which the um, the Pharisees and the Sadducees would be butting heads and sparks are flying, and it's as Calvin and Hobbes says, that conflict is drama, drama is entertaining, entertainment is marketable. But that's really not the whole point. But the point is that the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they're not just, parties on this side or one side or the other, but that they're actually come into conflict, but they can form sometimes coalitions, as they have before when John the Baptist comes to say, this person is a threat, and so We need to put aside our differences so that we can come together to address this issue. They did so with John the Baptist, they did so with Jesus, and now they're going to do so here. But here it's a little different because, frankly, Jesus has come into their territory, onto their turf, onto their stomping grounds. So there's a little bit of a turf war going on, and it behooves the Pharisees and the Sadducees to try and press Jesus on critical issues in order to try and trap him in his words, the words that Matthew uses, in order to do one of two things: either to dismiss him outright, to say, he's just one of those, or to paint him into a corner so that that if he's on this side of the fence, that means he's excluding the other people, and if he's on that side of the fence, then he's excluding the other people, so that one way or another, he just simply cannot win. And with each of the times that they try to test Jesus, to try to catch him in his words, he puts them aside. He puts them under. He silences them, so that neither the Pharisees nor the Sadducees really have any kind of answer for him. And this is similar to the way in which what you'll see here in these passages in today's reading. There's questions that are related to politics, questions that are related to ethics, questions that are related to theology, questions related to Christology, and all of these to try and box Jesus or pin him down into a particular area so that they can have sort of mastery over him. And Jesus won't have any of it. What the Pharisees and the Sadducees are trying to do is similar to the way you'll see people be brought on for interviews, like on Fox or NBC or CBS or NBCSN, whatever that is. No, that's the sports network. MSNBC or XYZ, one of those things. Like they're brought on to be able to try and either get a person to their side or the other, or try and paint them in a bad light, put them under the spotlight, as it were, to try and push him into a particular direction and to try and gain their mastery over him by an intense interrogation. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees are taking turns, taking jabs at him to try and figure out who Jesus is. And it's marvelous how Jesus really, in each of these situations, puts the Pharisees and the Sadducees in their place, because they're not interested in worshiping Jesus or in loving Jesus, but in order to get Jesus onto one side or the other to be able to fit their political purposes. And that's a good lesson that we all should actually have to learn today, as far as to know that Jesus is not a donkey or a Republican or a Pharisee or a Sadducee who can be tamed. He is indeed the Lion of Judah, the Lamb that was slain, who bids us to come and worship him. And so, but what we'll have here, what I want us to look at, is verses 34 through 40, and we'll read it together. And this it's a passage that I know that I frequently revisited, and for good reason, because this is a question about what things are most important. Because I think maybe you've known, and I've known, that the frustration or the disappointment when you invested your life so much into something, and you realized upon further reflection, or the years reflecting on it, that you're like, I really invested a lot into this, and on the whole, it really doesn't matter. And God doesn't want you or me to waste our lives on things that don't matter. And a passage like this is instructive for us to recalibrate our thinking, our attitudes, our minds, to realign them to God's purposes, so that our energies, our attitudes, our thinking, our ambitions are all shaped and informed by something that actually matters. It's directed on somebody that matters, or rather, somebody who matters. So let's read together. Verse 34. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together, so they're taking turns. The Sadducees are silent, so now the Pharisees have to, jump in for a little bit of pushback. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question: Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Now let's pause there for a second. Why is he testing Jesus with a question? Which is the most important, or which is the greatest commandment in the law? Now, it's important for us to remember that questions about which law is the most important is something that was fiercely debated, constantly debated in Jewish circles for a very long time. And why it is that he's asking this question, to my understanding, is the way in which he's trying to trap Jesus in this way and saying, oh, by the time that you think that this is the greatest commandment, that means that all of these other things are secondary. So that the people who think the secondary is primary will be against Jesus because he's regarded something as primary, and then they were for regard as something that's unimportant. And so it's like the way the logic when somebody some interviewer is interviewing a political candidate on CNN or something like that, and they say, well, what do you think about borders? And the person responds, well, I think we should secure the borders. And then the interviewer responds, oh, so that means you don't care about immigrants, huh? That's a big problem, isn't it, too? If you secure the borders, if that's the thing that's more important, that must mean that all this stuff is unimportant. And so, it's a logical fallacy to say that because you think that these things are most important, that means that these other things are unimportant. But the question is framed in such a way as to try and pin Jesus down on a certain position that puts him against something else that other people will think is important, and then therefore basically send him spinning around in trying to attach equal importance to everything to try and satisfy everybody, which is what we know that politicians do. And so this is apparently what this expert in the law is trying to do to Jesus, to try and situate him in a place where by regarding one thing as most important, then therefore treating other things as either less important or not important at all. So, it says this, verse 37, Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. Let's be absolutely clear here. When Jesus says, and he's quoting Deuteronomy 6:5, or a version of it anyway, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. In other words, what that means, the thing that's most important, is that we love God with everything that we have. Or you can put it another way to say, but the love of God is foremost, is the most important thing to me, it's going to take everything it is that I have. And then, what does he say after this? And the second is like it. Isn't that interesting? This expert in the law asks Jesus, which is the most important commandment? That's what he asks him. And Jesus gives him two. Why is he doing that? Well, let's find out. And it says the second is like it. love your neighbor as yourself. And it's important. I'm so thankful here that Jesus didn't say, like your neighbor as you like yourself. Because, I think as we all know, we don't always like each other, but that's true. But we also don't even always like ourselves when we're disappointed with our own decisions. But we love ourselves because we want our best interests. We have our best interests in mind in the choices that we make. And that in the same way, that if we're loving our neighbor as ourselves, we're looking out for the very best interest of our neighbors, which, as we've learned before, in the parable of the Good Samaritan, there's our neighbors isn't just referring to like our tightly knit social circle, with walls around it, where everybody is like us and thinks the same way that we do. That everybody is your neighbor. People of different religions are your neighbor. People of different sexual orientations are your neighbors. People who are of different political parties, they're your neighbors. And our command is to love them. And that is the first and foremost greatest commandment. And and then he says, uh, verse 40, all of the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Now, what this doesn't mean is to say that as long as you love God and you love people, that everything else doesn't matter. That it's just like the Beatles song, "All you need is love, da 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 da. All you need is love." I mean, Beatles are great. I mean, I guess, but I've never been a really big fan. But I digress. But yeah, it's not as to say, because if you have both of those things, that you don't need anything else, but rather all of our ethics, our commandments, the things that are most important, that if they're not, if they don't hang on, if they're not dependent on something that is of utmost importance, and that is our love for God and our love for others, nothing else matters. That this thing has to be foremost, and everything else has to flow out of it. And isn't it interesting when he says, "What's the greatest commandment?" It's to love the Lord your God with all your mind, uh, with all of your soul, and with all of your heart. That the vertical dimension of love between us and God has horizontal entailments. That if we're learning how to love God well, that sort of thing must manifest itself in love for others. In other words, the way in which that we love others is a direct result of how it is that we've given ourselves fully and completely to God. And by giving ourselves fully and completely to God, we can rightly, fully, and completely and effectively love everybody else in ways that truly seek out the very best of our neighbors, indeed everybody. And so the challenge, I think, for us is to say, well, one, are we loving God with all of our heart, with all of our soul, and with all of our mind? Uh, are we loving God in a way that every single aspect or feature of our lives is an act of worship, of giving our whole lives to God? To say, Lord, the way in which I study, the way in which I work, the way in which I play, the way in which I care for others, the way in which I seek justice, all of these things have to be a reflection or birthed out of the living love of a living God towards us and our love that's reflected towards him. As First John says, we love because God first loved us. So the challenge to each and every one of us is to make our lives an act of worship to God, uh, to indeed to love God with all of our oomph, all of our energy. That the love for God that we have is nothing short of giving our entire lives to Him, and to say, God, my life belongs to you because I love you, because you're a good God. And because I love you with all of my heart, with all of my soul, with all of my mind, I can express that type of love, that holy love, um, towards those around me, uh, towards all of my neighbors. That the nature of the love that I show towards them is the nature of the love that you've shown towards me. So, that's the devotion for today. But thank you so much for taking the time to listen. God bless you. God keep you. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.